Thank you.
In thinking about the presentation today about the chapter on work, when I looked at that chapter and read through it, I was struck with, there were just a couple, and my presentation will bear it out, but I just want to give a little bit of introduction, that there was just a little bit about work itself, the actual physical stuff and the balance that Benedict really espoused. And there was a whole lot of stuff about how to make sure that prayer was being taken care of in the midst of the work that had to be done within their community. The other realization was, when this was written, these men were cloistered, and everything was focused inward. So their rhythm of life, as many of us know from maybe visiting different monasteries of cloistered monks or nuns, there is this rhythm that has to be held and really sustains the life of the monastery. But then in thinking about it, I said, well, I'm an oblate. You all are oblates or oblates in formation. And, the life that we lead, and many of the sisters who are and brothers who are in today's monastic communities are out in the world as well. And so there's a different, a more expanded view of work that needs to be considered. So that's when my research and thoughts turned to Dorothy Day. Saint in waiting. And I found a really good resource called Ora e Labora, Dorothy Day's Philosophy of Work by Daniel Bornstrom. And it looks like it was one of those self-published or published things in Amazon. And really what it is, if you get it, and it's like $5, but if you get it, it's a pretty extensive research paper. Because everything there are some opinions in there, but a lot of what he is presenting has a lot of citations from either Dorothy's works or other people who have researched Dorothy. So with that in mind, let me dive in and see how well this goes. Okay. Present. There we go. Okay, so everybody can see it?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Well, I just made the citation. Okay. There we go. So chapter 40, whoops. Stop.
Oh boy.
Okay, I think I gotta, instead of pushing that button, there we go. I just gotta hit the slide one at a time. So when I looked at the rule and looked at the chapter, these were the two paragraphs that basically spoke to work per se, and then everything else in between. And it's a pretty long chapter, had to do with making sure that the times of prayer and the way that prayers and readings were supposed to be interspersed during the day were adhered to. But once again, in thinking about how this chapter on work can then be interpreted through the life of an oblate, I turned to Dorothy Day. And in just reading about her, and I am no way in any way, shape, or form an authority on Dorothy Day. So this was very much a learning experience and one that I'd like to continue. But she made her oblation in 1942, and then she made what was called a full profession of affiliation in 1955 at the age of 58. So one of the things that it spoke to me, and just with the question down at the bottom, think of your own journey to oblation. She was born in 1897. So it took her a while to knock on the door. And then, Mary Lou or Mary, maybe you can tell us what a full profession of affiliation means. But when I went to St. Procopius Abbey, they have on file her document of final affiliation. So any insights into what that was back in the day?
No, I don't, Bob, no.
Okay. Well, what I suspect, and of course it was 13 years from when she cited that she decided to become an oblate to this final affiliation. But it's clear in just reading about her that she really continued to deepen who she was as a person and who she was as an oblate, just continued to deepen over time. And, without a doubt, she used the Benedictine spirituality as a foundational aspect of her life. But in advance of her oblation, and I just wanted us to maybe toss some thoughts out. And I can't see anybody, so I can hear everybody. She was called to her faith then by oblation by the signs of her life and time. So let's just quickly review, what experiences Dorothy had leading up to 1942 that would have shaped her. Her motivation, of course, was internal, but what kind of shaped her heading up towards this time? And just as I said, I can't see anybody, and we don't need to raise hands, but just put stuff out there.
If anyone wishes to speak, remember to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I'll prime the pump a little bit. Of course, she came through World War I. She came through the Great Depression. Her educational experience, I think she started college, but then didn't finish. She was very much an activist. Some called her an anarchist. She got certainly drawn into really challenging what seemed to be wrong about the world in terms of the rich and the not so rich, or the rich and the certainly less than rich, and certainly the poor. So she invested in several movements, social movements. And when I say invested, she showed by her life that she was always like 100%, 150% in, much like a nun that we know. So, or some nuns that we know. So, anything else to add to what might have shaped Dorothy in the 48 or some years before she chose to make an initial oblation? She came through World War II. She made that right on in the midst of World War II as well, 1942. Okay. Well, if anything comes to mind, just holler. So going back again to what I presented, these little arrows that I put on here, after I read some more about Dorothy and her life, it made clear to me that, yeah, she definitely was about work, but her spirituality, which is really spoken about with these little arrows from chapter 48, is very notable as well. So let's just take a look at that real quick. So for Dorothy, and you can see what's highlighted there, reading of scripture became a daily discipline. And I like this quote here. When speaking to a drug addict, Dorothy once even described reading scripture as her daily fix. So certainly she knew how to do Lectio in a way that really got to her core. And then when the Catholic workers started to come about, and I don't know if they do it today, but Liturgy of the Hours became an undeviating and necessary custom of her life in the Catholic worker. And one other aspect of her spiritual life, her spiritual growth, was Matthew 25, 31 through 46, where basically Jesus is laying out the works of mercy. And, she took it, again, 150%, that if you do it if you do it to the least of my brethren, then you're going to do it to me. I also discovered that the little way of Thérèse de Lisieux was also very influential on Dorothy. And what she discovered was any little activity in the course of a day was important and could be a spiritual experience, even though she initially rejected it as pious pap, quote unquote. But after 2 decades of serving others, she discovered that there's some spiritual discipline that's associated with it. And as she said, not everyone could be a hero, but everyone could be heroic. So I think in thinking about this, about Dorothy, there are some other saints who are out there who have said kind of the same thing. And of course, Thérèse was one of those. But, you know, great love from small acts is what Dorothy seemed to be espousing and what she was doing during her Catholic worker life. So as she deepened, and we know that Dorothy converted to Catholicism and just embraced it fully to its core. So that became, kind of the center of her deep spirituality. And she, we know that many of us know that Catholic social teaching is one of the best kept secrets of the Catholic Church. But for Dorothy, that, in my words, sort of became her catechism. And so she saw that work was definitely a spiritual activity, and that it was part of God's creation. So those of us, and anybody who enters into work or participates in the work life, and in America, that's just part of who we are, our economic model, has to look at it through some different eyes, at least in Dorothy's viewpoint. So when she met Peter Marin, all these thoughts were flying around in her head, and this guy, Peter Marin, literally showed up on her doorstep one day and said, I think we could work together. And so what came from that unexpected alliance was the birth of the Catholic worker. And the 3 aspects of the Catholic worker are clarification of thought, works of mercy, and the Green Revolution. And Peter really gave Dorothy that kind of construct. So what practically then came from those ideas was the Catholic Worker newspaper, which is still being published today. So clarification of thought, Catholic Worker newspaper became the point of being able to present their thoughts. And when you go back in time to when it began, that was we obviously well before any kind of electronic media. So publications like the Catholic Worker, and they were handing them out, and they had subscriptions and using it to support themselves. But it became a widely circulated document in and around where Dorothy and some of the houses of hospitality, which was the works of mercy, how they came about. So in order to welcome those who needed to be served, they created the houses of hospitality. And then the farms of the community, they lived for little more than a decade, maybe a little longer than that. And that was kind of the Green Revolution, well before the time of the new Green Deal. But it was, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Koinonia down in Georgia. But to me, when I read about their farms, it spoke to me that people would work in community and live and serve each other and basically subsist off of their efforts, um, and welcome again people into that kind of world. But I didn't read long enough to understand how the farms ultimately could not gain enough traction to sustain themselves. So for Dorothy, in my opinion, ora e labora transformed itself, and again, thinking of it through the lens of oblation, into laborare est orare. To work is to pray. Um, and, you know, when you think about the words and the phrasing, um, there is a distinction. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that there's this distinction that Dorothy just continued to embody. Um, so when we think about chapter 48, Benedict is talking about balance and um, you know, making sure that the chunks of the day were used appropriately. What Dorothy is saying is it's a little more seamless than that. So I think those of us who are out in the world, whether we are oblates or religious, if we are not in a cloistered environment, it is a pretty distinctive way to look at work in chapter 48. And I think Dorothy, as our guide, has sort of laid out some foundational thinking about that. So as Robert Ellsberg wrote, there was really no distinction between what she believed, what she wrote, and the manner in which she lived. So she, yeah, it's just very humbling to encounter her in such a way that there was not a lot of disconnections between who she was and how she lived. But going back to work itself, she would surely point out, not all work is prayer, for not all work is good work. So she definitely had some opinions of what was acceptable work versus what led to a less than connected life with God and with others. So one of the things I sent out as part of our in advance reading was a homily that I ran across from Father Garrick Heckel. And Father Garrick is the retreat master down at Mepkin Abbey in South Carolina, where Barbara and I had the opportunity to go and go on retreat there. And it's once this is all behind us, if you ever have the opportunity to travel there, it just to give it a little bit of a plug, it started in I think the late 1940s or early 50s, when this property was deeded to the monks of Gethsemane by the Claire Booth Luce and her husband, who had taken it on as a southern place, and then when their child died in an automobile accident, they decided they couldn't stay there any longer. But it's a former plantation, a rice plantation from back in the Revolutionary days on the Cooper River down outside of Charleston. It's just a remarkable piece of property, and the monks, even though they are small in number now, have turned it into a place that's very well loved by the local community, as well as others from other places broader than South Carolina. So in his homily, Father Garrick starts to write about, looking at work differently. And this was about the gospel of where there was the story, the parable, where the landowner called people in and promised them a particular wage. And some went out in the field at the beginning of the day, and then some came later and were sent out to the field, but everybody received the same wage. So it really, to me, spoke to human dignity of and in through work. And I think that's where Dorothy continued to go. So you can see the words there. And, we have to look at work and think about work, not necessarily in practical ways, but also in the ways that God may be thinking about work, as Dorothy did. And so her response, she said, okay, if we're going to go about work, we have to think about what's possible. We can't be sort of stuck in a utopian future, and we have to take care of what is right in front of us. So she said the greatest hypocrisy is to say to a brother in need, go now be filled and give him no bread. So as Father Garrett continues, we have to look beyond productivity and all the trappings that are normally associated with our presentation in the work world. And I, having been there, done that. But it really is what grace, grace is what we're all about in our relationship with God and with others. Instead of making things to make us separate and distinct, or what's based on merit, we should just show up and open ourselves to what God is giving. And when we do, we begin to see our lives, the world, and our neighbor differently, as did Dorothy. So in her view, people could stop looking at work as a mere job by putting food on the table. So look at work as participation in the divine act of creation. And even if it came down to just putting food on the table, through grace, to turn that into a deeper meaning. And she reminds us, or we reminded, that even with Jesus and the apostles and disciples, they had to work. They had to work to live. And through Dorothy, even when work became difficult or tiresome, to try to rechannel the grace that would even come from that tiredness into just an act of turning it over. Not certainly an act of self-abuse, but to turn it over and to ask for grace, just to move through that kind of space. And so, in conclusion, with Father Garrick's homily, so how do we move forward in today? And I think, in a strange way, for all of us, as we've been reading the news and looking at news, the pandemic certainly has opened up those distinctions, the distinctions between those jobs that are supported by technology and can be easily socially distant, and those that can't. Those life experiences that, and for myself, I'll just speak for myself, by dumb luck, retired 3 or 4 years ago. And luckily, through Barbara and my planning, we were able to put together a financial plan that made us comfortable, and don't have to worry. Don't have to worry about how am I going to get to work today. Don't have to worry about whether or not I can go grocery shopping or I can pay the mortgage or the rent. And so I that's been on my mind a lot. But for all of us, we have to figure out how to open those channels of grace to God through us, to help others, as Dorothy did, who do not have these kinds of opportunities. And I think that's really what she was calling us to through her life. So the words here speak for themselves, but I will read them. A philosophy of work is essential if we would be whole people, holy people, joyous people. Dorothy felt all should thoroughly scrutinize their work. One would have to ask oneself, does my work contribute to the common good? Is it an expression of the works of mercy, or does it contribute to the degradation of others? Is it all implicated in the larger society structures of sin? Perhaps most importantly for Christians, one would have to ask oneself, is my work consistent with the gospel? And, and when I read this, sort of struck me. I came to this part of my life as my work life was winding down, and luckily I had found my place in a different kind of workspace. But certainly I can relate to these challenges early on, and I certainly dismissed them early on in my work life because it was all about me and not necessarily about others, including some days and not so good days, my own family. And Dorothy, was making it clear in her view of different types of work back in her day, that anything that promoted, and she really took on the advertising community a lot, but anything that promoted just self-absorption or kind of just wanton consumption, she had no place in that, place for that in any of her good thoughts. So she certainly is challenging us in her view of work, chapter 48, to put work into scrutiny. And I would, it also then brought me to a place of, if speaking about being retired and having resources, to look at investments, to look at where my money, our monies are being invested, and are we comfortable with that? The work that those investments is promoting is being used in some way, and is it for the growth and the goodness of society and fellow men, fellow people, or is it for something else that takes away, that is not life-giving? So I think that that's another challenge that has grown in me about this, looking at chapter 48 and thinking about it through the eyes of Dorothy Day. And so we'll just finish with this prayer that is on the St. Procopius website. And I think that's the official website of her movement towards canonization. Oh God, may the Church recognize the holiness of Dorothy Day, servant of God and Benedictine Oblate of St. Procopius Abbey, especially in her dedication to the liturgy, her desire for the justice of God's kingdom, and her devotion to the poor as persons in whom Christ is welcome. Amen. So let me get out of full screen, and if anything needs to be stop share, and there we are, we're back together. So thoughts, questions, comments?
Bob, one of my
Bob?
thoughts throughout your presentation was, well, two things. One, I look at shows, and one of them, Survivor, and it just, seems so out of kilter to me with what the world should be. And the second thought that stuck with me, through your presentation is how throughout my work life, throughout my career, I really look at my work as vocation. And I think if we do that, we also get a kind of a more realistic view of what the world should be and what people should be.
Thank you.
I had a thought that I really appreciated the Father Heckel's homily. Like so many of the parables, sometimes they're kind of hard to accept, on face value. But, the idea that we all know grace isn't earned, you just get it, right? So I think expressing in there, really breaking it down. And I mean, we've all been the ones, we've all been the wage earners who have put in the full day. But we've also all been the ones that didn't put in the full day, but we showed up, and guess what? God's grace is for everybody. And that is something that really is hard to see in life. Like he says about the little kids, it's not fair. Well, and you know what? Life isn't fair, but God is. And that was really, to me, one of the most awesome demonstrations of grace and that's again a parable that, like a lot of them, I have a hard time with. So that was just super for me. Super. Thank you.
Mhm.
I had the opportunity to see Dorothy Day and Mother Teresa at the Eucharistic Congress in 1975 in Philly.
Hmm.
And to hear them both on the same platform, on the same podium, standing side by side, it was quite an introduction to me of what social justice is about. And as a community, we get the Catholic Worker, the periodical, the newspaper, and I have the phone number if anyone's interested. Not today, but if anyone's interested, to call the office and you talk right to a worker.
Mary,
And
if
say
you email it, if you email that to me, I'll make sure that everybody gets it.
thank you. Gotcha. Okay, doke. I'll finish.
Well, thank you, Bob, very much for
Excellent.
your presentation.
Very good. Very good.
The thing, I'll try to get through this. That which surprises me and edifies me so much is the fact that lay people like Dorothy Day have introduced yourselves to Saint Benedict and his rule. It just absolutely amazes me that people, I don't know where they get the information. I mean, I know we live in a world today where information is easy to get, but when you look back to Dorothy Day's time back in the 40s, I didn't even realize that there were such people as oblates back then. We didn't start our oblate program until 1982. That's when I first became knowledgeable of the fact that there were such people in the world. So I'm just edified and absolutely amazed that people have found Benedict. I mean, it was handed to me, but they searched like she did. Okay.
I just have, Mary mentioned Mother Teresa, and I went to college at Atchison, Kansas at the Mount. And in 1981, I was out there for a visit, and Mother Teresa was there with the picture on. I took a picture of her with one of my friends, Sister Fabiola Burns. So this is it was a moment, like Mary said, to be the presence of someone like Dorothy Day or Mother Teresa. So that's from the Mount in Atchison. So at any rate, she was a guest there. I was lucky to be there on a visit when she was there.
And I think, with Mary and Pat, with your reflections on meeting such devoted and holy people, we, again, by their example, I just want to remind myself and remind all of us that we may not be like that 24/7, but we can be it at least a little bit each and every day. And I think that's what Dorothy was calling us to, for sure.
You know, I just got a moment flash. God has a plan, and it unfolds through us, his witnesses of faith and belief. So through small heroic acts, it's just a thought.
I kind of wanted to say that too. I was wondering what the turning point was while Bob was talking in her life, because I think before she got involved with the Catholic worker movement and everything, I feel like I heard that she was pretty, led a pretty, like so many of the saints, like Augustine, for instance, and others. And then something turned her around, and it seemed like it was that, was it Peter Morin? I was wondering. And then I think, Bob, you said that I think he got her involved with the Catholic worker movement. So I guess that's probably the same for us. Something happens that triggers, something in us that we want to start, being better or doing better, whatever. I don't know. Anyway, you answered the question before I got a chance to ask it. So I think that's probably what, so I guess when we, talk to people or evangelize to people, or just even by our life, show people, then that's kind of how some people might get turned around, if
And
that
I-
makes any sense.
And I think that's what we do have to do. We have to live, we have to live the life. We have to walk the walk,
Right.
not just
Probably
talk
more
the
than
talk.
words. Right.
Right.
Exactly. Mhm.
Yeah, just again, a little bit, and you're taking us back into Dorothy's early days. I know she had her child, her daughter was born out of wedlock, as the old saying goes, and I think she might have had an abortion before that.
I think I read that.
Yeah. So she, as many of us have done, she searched the world for happiness and couldn't find it in those kinds of places or peacefulness. And Peter Morin, she was becoming known just through her writing. She was a newspaper person and was becoming known through her writings. And literally, Peter Morin came over from Europe and showed up on her doorstep and started sharing with her the philosophies that were guiding him. And between the two of them, they created the Catholic Worker. So yeah, it was only because of the two of them, as I read it, the Catholic Worker came into being.